Just 1 minute. Okay. Yes, sir, continue.
That's Jai Bhim to all. I would like to thank Dr. Rajendra. Yesterday he has called me and just told me that to present the path to salvation that I have prepared in a PowerPoint format. Actually, if you read a book, there are 5 ways of reading. One is like sound reading. Sound reading, it will be in a class 1 to 5. You asked to say A, B, C, D in a group, and they say that. And second is called a group reading. And actually, this reading matter comes when Gandhi and Leo Tolstoy, they have a conversation about reading habits. The third habit is the visual reading. Like you have to create a visual impact when you read a book, and it will make more impact. And the fourth is a silent reading. The Leo Tolstoy gives an example for silent reading. When you go to college, like what we are doing in a virtual reading group is a group reading. And the fourth is a silent reading, where he quotes Karl Marx as an example for silent reading. The final one is a deep reading, where you understand everything. For that, he quotes Baba Sahib as an example for deep reading, and that is an example for this thing. So the path to salvation, already Dr. Rajendra has given a brief about when and where, how it was been ordered. Actually, Baba Sahib is giving a talk about conversion on 31st May in Marathi by Mahar in Bombay. Okay, and he introduced the audience. When you introduce the audience, people have gathered in a large number, and says that people would have understand the impact of conversion, and he says that the conversion is very closer to me, and according to me, your future depends upon this subject, and it needs to do a proper planning before making a movement of conversion to become a successful one. And it is not a children game or not a subject of entertainment. It deals with how to make a man's life successful. So he quotes an example like a boatman, how he is preparing for a voyage. So when you see that the boatman cannot prepare for a voyage unless he doesn't know how many people are going to travel in the boat, and without preparation, it is impossible to reach the shore. And the boatman likely to know how many people are coming, and he does not collect the luggage unless he knows how many people are going to travel in the boat. So it cannot start the preparation for conversion without how many people are going to leave the Hindu fold. That is what Baba Sahib says. The next question he raises, some of the people may raise an objection to why this conversion, why this is only convenient for a Mahar's regime, not for others. If the declaration of conversion is meant for all untouchables, why the meeting of all untouchable have not been convened? He is ready to answer for that questions. He says there are reasons for convening a conference for Mahar's alone. Firstly, neither we are not going to safeguard or any political rights to be demanded from the Hindus through this conference. And he says the only question before this conference is what should be done for the betterment of our life? How we are going to carve out a path for our future life? If these questions can be solved, and it needs to be solved by the respective castes separately. So another reason he says, actually he declares this conversion 10 months before, and his people were making efforts to propagate this declaration to the public and creating so many meetings. And he wants to get a public opinion. So holding up such a meeting, each caste separately will be the simplest way to judge the opinion. And this meeting of the each caste separately will be more representative and reliable than the opinion arrived at through a common meeting of all untouchable castes. Although the other communities are not included, they will not be at loss. If they do not intend to convert, they have no reason to regret they are not being included in this conference. If at all they wish to leave their religion, nothing can come in their way, stop, because they have not participated in the conference. The other communities like Maghars are free to hold meetings such as and express their public opinion. I would advise them to hold such meetings, and he says, I'm ready to help at best of my capacity. So coming for a conversion, for a common man, it is important as well as difficult to understand, and it is difficult to grasp. Even if you talk to the educated people, it is very difficult to understand, and they will not take it easily. And unless everybody is satisfied, it is difficult to bring an idea of conversion into reality. So coming to the material aspect of conversion, he says what is the material aspect means, what is the theme of conversion, what is the idea, what is the idea behind conversion. The conversion has two aspects. It has got social as well as religious, as well as material, as well as spiritual. And whatever may be the aspect or the line of thinking, it is necessary to understand the beginning of nature of the untouchability. To understand its nature and how it is practiced, without understanding, you will not be able to realize the real meaning of underlying my declaration of conversion. In order to have a clear understanding of the problem of untouchability and its practice in real life, you should recall the stories of atrocities perpetrated against you. You can see that the beating by the caste Hindus, for the simple reason they have claimed. The Dalits, they have claimed right to enroll your children into the school, or right to draw water from the public well, right to take out a marriage procession with a groom on a horseback, putting on superior clothes, using like utensils made of copper. These are all the filthy reasons they will beat you, and they create a hatred against you. The atrocities, people may ask now, still there is an atrocities being practiced in India. These are all the real pictures. These are all the 90s and 20s, and this picture shows that there is a corpse, there is a dead body, is not allowed to take to the public, that is the main land. They have to drop the body into the river and they have to take it for the burial ground. And this is the situation. And this is recently you might have seen in the newspaper a young boy shot dead for entering into the temple. So these are some of the atrocities. Even for serving a chapatis in a dinner party, this atrocity continues. Some of you might have experienced using weapon. They use this weapon as a social boycott. These are some of the recent atrocities. This is 10 days old. A child was abused in Tamil Nadu because there is nobody is raising the voice against them. And there are other atrocities like disallowing our cattle racing through the jungle and prohibiting a man from entering into the village. Have you realized as why all this happens? Is asking the people. And what is the root of their tyranny? To me, it is very necessary for us to understand it. This is a matter of class struggle. It's nothing to do with the virtues of an individual or a feud between two rival men. Untouchability is a matter of class struggle. It's a struggle between the caste Hindus and the untouchables. It's not a matter of doing injustice against one man against. This is a matter of injustice being done by one class against another class. So then why we have to struggle for the social status? It's a matter of injustice being done by one class against another, and how one class should keep its relations with the other class. The struggle starts as soon as you start claiming equal treatment of others. That's like eating chapati, superior class, and fetching water in a metal pot, and sitting a bride groom on your horse back. Then why do the caste Hindus get irritated? Because your behavior with them is on par. It insults them. Though your status is very low, you are impure. They expect you must be remain in the lowest rung. So they will allow you to happily. The moment you cross your level, the struggle starts. It is not a struggle for your survival. It is struggle forever. As long as the untouchability is there, the struggle has to continue. Untouchability is not a timely or a temporary feature. It's a struggle between the Hindus and the untouchables. It's a permanent phenomenon. It is eternal. Religion, which has given you the lowest level in the society, is itself eternal. It's a belief of high caste people. You are the lowest of the rank today. You shall remain the lowest forever. How to survive? How to escape? Think. If you're not ready to think, you want to desire to behave in the obedience to the wishes of the Hindu society and as their slaves, please don't think. If you think, if you wish to live in a life with self-respect and equality, please think. How should we survive through this struggle? One who holds strength becomes the victor. One who has no strength need not expect a success. The next question comes, do we have a strength? What are the types of strength is propagated? Some manpower, financial power, and mental strength. All the three strengths are very important before you take a decision to convert. Coming to the manpower, when he says in 1936, he is declaring in Bombay, it's a minority. Our people are unorganized in the villages with the subcastes among the untouchables. And he says that we are 1/8 of Bombay presidency. We see now, we are, as per the census of the 2011, we are almost about, both, if you include both the SC and STs, it's almost about 1/4 of our population. That is about 25% of the total population is our untouchables. But unfortunately, we are scattered in the villages. Coming to the financial strength. Do we have a financial strength? Is that worse? You don't have any trade, no business, no service, no land, no food, no clothes, and the piece of bread thrown by the higher caste in your means of livelihood. Untouchables tolerate insult, tyranny, and oppression and the hands of Hindu without any shy of complying. They don't even go to complain them. You have no capacity to get redress from the law courts and bear the expenses. This is socio-economics. People may claim that do we have now? It's a study conducted from Madurai and the socio-economic status of Dalit in India. This paper is published in 2016, and the conclusion: the population is about 20.1 crore, and still it is practiced. There are so many forms, and the modern form is entirely different. There are 140 forms of social discrimination being practiced by the caste Hindus against Dalits. The next comes the mental strength. Do we have a mental strength? It still was, because already you are suppressed. Your tolerance of insult and tyranny without grudge, complaint has been killed. The sense of retort. You don't have any strength to retort or revolt. You lost your confidence, you lost your vigor, and you lost your ambition. You have become helpless and energetic. You are pale. Everywhere, because of this, there is an atmosphere of defeatism and pessimism. Even the slight idea that you can do something cannot come into your mind. Then you should realize why this oppression is against you. If you depend on your own strength, you will never be able to face the tyranny of the Hindus. I have no doubt that you are oppressed because you have no strength. It is not that you are alone or in the minority. There are so many things. If you take a village, only they are not only against you. Not Muslims also have. If they have only 2 houses in a village, no one dares to touch them. Why does this happen? Find a suitable answer for this. And he comes with an answer. The Hindus realize that the strength of whole of the Muslim population in India stands behind of those 2 houses in the villages. These 2 houses also enjoy the free and fearless life. The whole Muslim community from Punjab to Madras will rush down to protect them at any cost. Does the Hindus will do for you? No one will come to your rescue. Nobody will help you. And don't expect any financial help to reach you, nor the officers in the duty also not going to help you any eventuality. The Tehsildar or police belong to the caste Hindus. If there is a dispute, if they are in the position, they are more faithful to their caste than their duty. The Hindus practice injustice and tyranny against you only because you are helpless, you don't have any strength. There are some facts you should understand. You cannot face the tyranny without strength. You do not possess enough strength to face the tyrant. Then the third one automatically follows you. The strength required to face the tyranny needs to be secured from outside. How will you be able to secure this strength? Think, take your mind, put your mind and think unbiased mind. The strength needs to be brought from outside. For that, you should understand the casteism and the religious fanaticism, what is practiced in India. India has a peculiar effect on the minds and morality of the people. In this country, nobody feels the pain at poverty and suffering. People, they help in poverty, sorrows, and suffering only to those belong to their caste and religion. That you can see in the recent floods or the storms and floods. You can see that. And though this sense of morality is perverted and cannot be forgotten, that is prevalent in this country. In that, even in the villages, the untouchables suffer in hands of Hindus. So we have to get a strength from outside. It is not that there are no men of other religions that they do not realize the oppression or untouchables is unjust. They do not rush to the rescue of the untouchable. If you ask them why, What is the business do we have it to interfere? Had you been the members of our religion, we would have helped you. That finally the religion comes there. Unless you establish a close relationship with some other society, unless you join some other religion, you cannot get the strength from outside. You must leave your present religion and assimilate yourself with some other society. Without that, you cannot gain the strength of that society. So long as you do not have a strength, you and your future generations will have to lead a life in the same pitiable conditions. Coming to the next aspect of conversion is the spiritual aspect of conversion. We have discussed how the conversion is necessary for your material
Muthu
gain.
sir.
Yes.
Muthu sir.
Yes. Yes.
Can we have a break, because some people may have some doubts or they want to ask something. I think we can give few minutes.
Sorry,
Sure.
it's a live session. We'll discuss at the end of the session, sir. Please have patience.
Okay, ma'am. Then continue, sir. Please continue.
So the spiritual aspect of conversion, we have discussed how the conversion is necessary for material gain, how this conversion is equally necessary for a spiritual well-being. So for that, you should know what is religion, why it is necessary. Let us first try to understand that what is the definition of religion. If you take Tilak's definition, means a religion that which knits the people up together is a religion. Religion means there are set of rules imposed for the maintenance of the society. It does not disclose or clarify the nature of rules which maintains the society. Which religion is necessary for the man which does not disclose the rules? What should be the nature of the rules which governs the society? And what should be the real nature of the religion? And what should be the relationship between the man and the society? Baba Sahib giving 3 answers. The ultimate goal of a society is to achieve happiness for the individual. The society exists for the development of a man, inherent qualities and energies to help him develop himself. And the chief objective of the social organization is not the development or the happiness of the individual. It is to create an ideal society. We should understand the concept of Hindu religion. In Hindu religion, there is no place as only to serve the above 3. How can a religion forgets everyone needs knowledge, everybody needs to have a home, and everyone wants to have a money? Then only it is a true religion. And I would say the religion of Hinduism is a Chaturvarnya of the Hinduism, with view to educate few persons and keep the rest in the dark. It is a strategy to keep the people in a mental slavery. That's what's happening now. And a religion which permits some people to bear the arms and prohibit the rest, it is a plan to keep the latter in a perpetual slavery. A religion which opens the path of acquiring property for some and compels the others to depend on these few, even for the daily necessities of life, but it is utter selfishness. So what are the factors required for an upliftment of an individual? At least you should have some sympathy, you should have an equality, and you should have a liberty. Can you say by experience that any of these factors exist for you in Hinduism? Is there any sympathy for you in Hinduism? I would say is nil. Wherever you go, nobody looks at you sympathetically. Hindus have no sense of brotherhood towards you. You are treated by them worse than a foreigner. The relationship of the neighboring Hindus and the untouchables of the village, it is rather no one can, they are brothers. It's something like a opposite armies in a warring camps. When you come to sympathy, they consider, the Hindus will consider Muslims closer than you. And Hindus and Muslims are helpful to each other in their local boards and the political connection, legislative council, and their business. They are always cultivate hatred against you in their minds. You know the effects of hatred. Can be heard from those who have had an occasion to go to the court for justice or a police station for the help. Do you expect the sympathy? Does any one of you believe that the court will do justice or the police will act rightly? What is the reason for their cultivating such a sense of hatred? Why do not believe that the Hindus will rightly use their authority? Because they lack sympathy towards you. What is the use of living in this midst of such hatred? The next comes the equality. Is there any equality for you in Hinduism? Such a living example of inequality will not found anywhere in the world. If you tell them, the foreigner, they will laugh at you. Nowhere in the history of mankind can be seen this inequality is more intense than untouchability. One may not offer his daughter to another in marriage, or one may not dine with others. There are all examples of inequality. It's not uncommon. Is there any system anywhere in the world it's existing where a man treated so low as not to touch him? Can anybody believe that there exists an animal called man? By whose touch the water is polluted and God becomes unworthy for worship? Is there any difference between the treatment given to an untouchable and to a leper? Though the people have a nausea in their minds for a leper, they have at least some sympathy for you. But people have a nausea as well as hatred against you. Your condition is still worse than a leper. Some people say that untouchability is a stigma of Hindu religion. And nobody believes that the Hindu religion is dirty. Majority of the Hindus, however, they believe that you are dirty, you are polluted. Then how you have been brought to this condition? I think you have been forced to this condition because you are continuing to be Hindus. Those who become Muslims or Christians are treated by the Hindus neither as untouchable nor as an unequal. There is a recent incident in Trivandrum. A Diya, it's a community. They are allowed to walk on the high caste street once they become Sikh. What does it show? It is your relationship with the Hindu religion. Hindus may try to soothe you, the untouchables, by saying that you get educated yourself, be clean, and then we'll touch you, we'll treat you as on par. We all know by experience and condition of the clean, educated, rich Mahar as bad as uneducated, poor and dirty. If one is not respected because he is uneducated or poor and well not dressed a person, how can you secure equality? Who cannot gain education, achieve property, or dress highly for a common man? If we think other religion like Christianity and Islam, their principle of equality is taught, whatever with knowledge and wealth or dress, its outward aspect. Both these religions consider a sense of humanity as a mean feature of religion. They preach that the sense of humanity should be respected by all. None should respect others. None should treat others unequals. All these teachings are completely wanting in the Hindu religion. What is the use of such a religion in which a man's sense of humanity has no value? And what is the good in clinging in it? So as per the Upanishad, the God is all pervading. That means spread everywhere. The religion and science are two different things. Whether the particular theory is a principle of science or a teaching of religion, that the God is all pervading is the principle of science. It's a philosophy, not the religion. Religion has a direct relation with the behavior of a man. If God is all pervading, the principle of God being omnipresent is not the teaching of a religion. It is the principle of science, that is philosophy. Hindus do not act according to the above principle. They will not accept that. They don't accept the science. If Hindu insists on this very point and say that the principle of God being omnipresent is not the principle of philosophy, it is a basic principle of this religion. Nowhere in the world such meanness would be found as existing among Hindus. They can be ranked among those cruel people. Those utterances and acts are two poles apart. They are wide apart. They have, as in the proverb, ram on their tongue and a knife under their armpit. They will speak like a saints and act like a butchers, and do not keep company with them. Those who believe that God is omnipresent, but treat men worse than animals. Those who feed ants with sugar, but kill men by prohibiting them to drink water. They are called hypocrites. What effects their company has produced upon you? You have ceased to be respected if you have a company with them. You have no status at all. Not only the Hindus, but the Muslims and Christians too consider you the lowliest of the lowly. Because the Hindus consider you as the lowest of the low, the Muslims and Christians also consider you like this. They fear that if the Hindus and Muslims, the Christians and Muslims treat you on par, the Hindus will treat them also as low. That is the reason. Thus, we are not low in the eyes of Hindus alone. We are the lowest in the whole of India because of the treatment given by the Hindus. If you get rid of this shameful condition, if you have to cleanse the filth and make use of this precious life, there is only one way, that is to throw away the shackles of the Hindu religion and Hindu society in which you are growing. I will finish this. This will be the last topic today. Then we have the part 2. Do you have any freedom in the Hindu religion? Some people might say, you have had a freedom of trade guaranteed by the law, like any other citizen of the country. You are also said to have got a personal liberty like others. You will have to think deeply over such statements, whether they are really carry any meaning. What is the good in saying like that? Though you have a freedom to trade, to a person who is deprived of any business virtue of his birth by society, how can you have a freedom of trade? You are at a liberty to enjoy your property. Nobody will touch your money. That's what the Hindu says. To a person who all the doors of means of livelihood and acquiring property are closed, who is treated as unfit for entry into any service due to the defilement attached to him by birth. The law may guarantee various rights, but the real rights are which are permitted by the society. The law may allow you to do the business, law may allow you to do the trade, but the society will not allow you, and it is a right which is permitted by the society to be exercised by you. And a right to wear decent clothes, but if the Hindus do not allow them to put on these clothes. The right to fetch water in metal pots, the right to use metal utensils, the right to put tiles on their houses. Hindu society does not allow them to exercise these rights. Even now, there is a village in Tamil Nadu you have your law have a right. That means you have become a panchayat leader, but the other caste Hindus have murdered him just because he became a leader of panchayat. They are not allowed him, even though he has a right, but the society has not allowed them. What is the use of such rights, which is permitted by the society to be exercised can be called as a right. A right which is guaranteed by law, but is opposed by the society, is of no use at all. So we need of a social liberty. Without social liberty, whatever which is guaranteed by law, whatever freedom is provided by law to you is of no avail. Of course, you can go anywhere, you can speak anything you wish, the subject to the restriction imposed by law. That is called physical freedom. What is the use of such freedom? Man has a body as well as mind. He needs physical as well as mental freedom. Mere physical freedom is of no use. What is mental freedom? Freedom of mind is the prime importance. What is meant to a man by physical freedom? It means he is free to act according to his own free will. A prisoner is unchained and is set to free. What is the principle underlying this? He is already prisoner but unchained. He should be free to act according to his own free will. He should be able to make the maximum use of the abilities he possesses. What is the use of such freedom of a man whose mind is not free? He quotes, the freedom of mind is the real freedom. A person whose mind is not free, though he is not in jail, he is a slave. One whose mind is not free, though he is not in jail, is a prisoner. One whose mind is not free, though he is alive, is almost equal to death. So ultimately, the freedom of mind is the proof of one's existence. To whom can we say that that his mind is free? To call him as a free man, who, with a consciousness awake, realizes his rights, responsibilities, and duties. He who is not a slave of circumstances is always bent upon changing them in his favor. One who is not a slave of usage, customs, and traditions or the teachings because they are brought down from the ancestors. One who the flame of reason is not extinguished. A free man who has not surrendered himself. He should not act on the teachings of others blindly and does not keep faith on anything unless he examines critically in the light of the so-called cause and effect. You should know what is the cause, what is the effect. Then only you should think, then only you can call him as a free man, who is always prepared to protect his rights, and he should not afraid of public criticism. The man who has enough intellect and self-respect so as not to become a doll in the hands of others. The free man, he who does not lead his life under the direction of others. A free man who carves out his own aim of life according to his own reason. And he can decide himself as to how and what way the life should be led. In short, a man is the master of his world, him alone, and I consider a free man. Are you free? Have you any freedom to carve out your own life and your aim? Not only you have no freedom, but you are worse than slaves. Your slavery has no parallel. Hindu religion, one cannot have a freedom of speech. He must act according to the Vedas. They do not support the actions. The instructions must be short from the Smritis. It failed to provide any such instruction. He must follow in the footsteps of the great men. is not supposed to reason out. Hence, so long as you are in the Hindu religion, you cannot expect to have a freedom of thought. Some people might argue Hindu religion did not force you alone into a mental slavery. And he says that it has snatched away the freedom of mind of all other communities. Hindus are also living under a state of mental slavery. Nobody should conclude that the sufferings of all are alike. And everyone in the Hindu religion is not equally affected by the effects of mental slavery as produced. This mental slavery is in no way detrimental to the material happiness of the caste Hindus. Coming to the mental slavery, though the caste Hindus are slaves of the above mentioned trio, that is Vedas, Smritis, and dictates of the great men, they are given a high position in the Hindu social system, that is the Brahminical system. They are empowered to rule over others. It is an undisputed fact that the whole Hindu religion is the creation of the high caste Hindus for the welfare and the prosperity of the high caste. In the society which they call a religion, has assigned you the role of a slave. You are a slave, so that you may not be able to escape from this slavery. Every arrangement is made in the structure of the society. That is why you are more in need of breaking the bondage of the mental slavery of this religion than any other community. Hinduism has made your progress from all sides. It has sacked your mental freedom and made you slaves. If you want to be free, you must change your religion. I would like to stop from here, then we have a discussion. Then the rest of it we'll have as a part 2, Rajendra. Hello?
Okay, sir. So we
Yes, yes.
a few questions also, so we'll take that.
Sonika, we can complete the whole session. After that, we can we can take question and answer.
Muthu sir, you want to continue the second session also? You want it on some other day?
Better to have a break, no? We can have it as a part 2.
Yeah.
Okay,
Because
sir.
it will take another half an hour to 45 minutes.
Yes, yes, sir. We complete this second part, and after that, we will take all the question and answer. Sir, you may continue, sir.
You want me to continue the rest of it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So it will take another. That is what I would like to. For me also, it is better. Actually, I have prepared the part 1 only because I want to put some visuals into that. The part 2,
Okay.
I didn't put much visuals, like what I have prepared in the part 1.
Okay, sir. Fine.
Okay.
Sonika,
Yes, sir.
We'll
please
have it some other day as a part 2.
ask the question. There is many more question in.
Sir, we have Dr. Gurcharan Singh sir with us, and he has put a question that how do we relate this speech on conversion to the present scenario? Do we still require conversion? If yes, then how? And what are the options we can give to the society?
One by one question.
Sir,
There are so many questions.
Muthu sir, are you able to hear?
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
So Baba Sahib has clearly said that in his speech, what is the, but first I would like to ask Dr. Kulcharan, is there any untouchability now?
Gurcharan Singh sir, if you want to answer.
Is there any untouchability practice now?
Yes, it is.
Hello.
Yes, yes, please, sir.
Jai Bhim to all. Yes, there is untouchability prevalent in the society even now.
Yes. So as long as the untouchability is there, and when then how can you expect to progress? Wherever you go, you will be seen like a untouchable. The hatred shown on you. Like I can quote an example. I am a leading surgeon in Chennai, one of the even in India. If I go to an hospital for an employment, the employer who recruits is the Brahmin. He would like to have a Brahmin rather than me. If he come to know that I am a so and so. So unless if the question is like something like if I am a the question like in North India you have a surname behind you, so people will recognize you by your name. And like I can say I was an examiner in Bikaner, and there are candidates appearing for an examination, and one of the candidates' name obviously shows that he is so and so. The other examiner's face, you can see that hatred. So it is still being practiced. So if you say as a Hindu, the next question comes in their mind: who are you? If your name doesn't show that, the next question comes as
What is the caste?
What is your caste? Like I am from Tamil Nadu. I worked in a hospital in Gujarat. My name is Muthu Veeramani. It doesn't mention wherever it is, like whatever it is. But the class 4 worker in that hospital asking me, Sahib, aap kaun hai? He expects me, aap kaun hai? So I have to tell him that I'm a Shudra. So it is still practicing. So if I say Hindu, then the next question comes up on it. Then if I say, if you convert, if you are a Muslim or a Christian, then the next question is not coming there. That is the reason. Still, it needs now, even in the current era, whatever. Actually, I want to put the topic, the Baba Sahib's the talk. Does it hold truth now? That is what my destiny. It's even now it holds truth.
So conversion is not done there at your places.
Sorry.
Conversion is not done at your places.
Not
Buddhism,
much.
Okay. So you have not embraced Buddhism at your side.
I have actually. I'm an atheist. Like initially, it is easy for an atheist to convert to Buddhism rather than a ardent Hindu.
Yes.
It's actually, I have never visited. I have actually, when I was studying in the college, I visited a temple. The priest, he was asking money to worship. That day onwards, I stopped going to the temple. That is 1980s. I never visited a temple.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Dr. Muthu sir. It was a wonderful live session, and
Mangesh can throw some light on that. Whether I have answered the question or not.
Okay, sir. Mangesh sir.
Basically, I am very impressed with Dr. Muthu Anna's presentation, and you know that speech itself is not very easy speech. It's a very difficult speech that Baba Ambedkar delivered, and as sir has attempted to explain that to us, it's a great attempt, and I would like to say thank you to you, sir. And when we hear something from such a famous nephrologist, neurologist, from his interesting presentation on this, and he has tried to update it with the contemporary facts. So kudos to you, sir. Thank you so much for having done this wonderful presentation.
Thanks for the lockdown.
Sir, thanks to the lockdown. Yes.
Otherwise, I would not have time.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You are a high flyer going here and there. So I think what is interesting here is, sirs, the one of the things that like if we want to eat the main course, we have to wait the appetite. So I think our community should go back to reading Baba Sahib Ambedkar's literature, because that is like a strategical documents and very revolutionary ideas that Baba Sahib Ambedkar has produced. Studying all different disciplines. So it's very imperative for all of us to really study the writing and speeches of Baba Sahib Ambedkar, and in the light of today's problems, because as our brother, I think Jatinder was saying, Guru Sharan Singh Sahib was saying that what about untouchability? In 2006, there was a study conducted in 11 states in India, and it tried to map the practices of untouchability, and it was found that the untouchability is still practiced in different forms and different content, different sites. So, for example, sites like temple or school and public places where untouchability is still practiced, and that study was titled as Untouchability in Rural India. And different forms of untouchability, like in 30% or so villages, the postman refused to go to the Dalit houses to deliver the letters. So it is in 2006. So we can say that this untouchability is still practiced even today, not only in rural India, but there are studies which are saying that even in the urban areas the untouchability is practiced. There are a lot of localities where you will not find the scheduled caste people because of the practice of untouchabilities. Even today, the caste of the people will be asked if they go to seek the houses for rent. It happens in Mumbai, it happens in Delhi, it happens in Bangalore, it happens everywhere. So the point is that we have to be, we have to acknowledge the fact that the untouchability as a practice even exists today. That's why we have this Prevention of Atrocity Act, which came from the Article 17 of our Constitution, which prohibits practice of untouchability in any form and any site. So I think if we take into consideration these facts today, the situation that Muthu sir described via Baba Sahib Ambedkar's beautiful text, Mukti Kon Pathe, I think it rings true to us that even today the practice of untouchability is there. And why it is there? Because we try to we get caught up in a religion which does not belong to us. Actually, as a matter of fact, we were never Hindus, and Hinduism is like an artificial construct, as Jyotiba Phule has taught us that Hinduism is an artificial construct, and he goes on further describing it as the Brahminical machination. So it's a game of the Brahmin. They created this Hindu religion so as to blur the ideas of the caste and use it politically to become a political majority. So coming to that, it's very important for each one of us to bring out our communities from that hell of caste. Baba Sahib Ambedkar described Hinduism as a hell of caste. And then we think about the egalitarian religions, like we think about the egalitarian religions like Christianity or Islam or other religions is okay. But why Baba Sahib Ambedkar has taken Buddhism? Because Buddhism is a religion of the soil, and it offers a very systematic critique of Brahmanism. And Buddha was sort of a first revolutionary in the history of the world who talked about equality. Equality between the human beings was his rallying point, and that is the reason why we see that Buddhism has spread all over the world, because it basically taught equality between the people. It was a radical thought that time, and even today, that all human beings are equal, and we can find this resonance in the great teachings of Nanak Sahab. We can find this resonance in the great teachings of Kabir and Guru Ghasidas. Guru Ghasidas, our very famous saint from Satnami community, says, "Man ke ek barabar." All human beings are the same. And Kabir Sahab also says the same thing. That Nanak Sahab also says the same thing. So we have to pick up this revolution against which the counter revolution took place, the Brahminical counter revolution took place, and again we need to bring this revolutionary spirit of how we can bring equality between the people. But the equality between the people is not possible unless there is, as Muthu sir has communicated to us via Baba Sahib Ambedkar, that unless there is a sympathy for the other human beings. And Baba Sahib Ambedkar has described it very beautifully, that democracy is nothing but the respect and reverence for the fellow human beings. So without respect and reverence for fellow human beings, the society cannot be truly democratic. So whatever Muthu Saab has discussed today via Babasaheb Ambedkar's beautiful text, and sir has made it very contemporary by putting up a lot of examples and data. So I think, you know, we need to think about this very clearly, and further in the speech which we are going to listen maybe next time when Muthu sir will present part 2 of the speech, that Babasaheb Ambedkar encourages us to come out en masse, not usually. So I think, you know, that's very full today, sir, Muthu sir.
Yeah, thank you, Mangesh sir. And thank you to all the viewers who are watching this session, and will come back soon with the part 2 of this wonderful session by Dr. Muthu sir. Thank you all of you. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, sir.
Now we are not no more live, so it's an open discussion. Now we can have a, because so many questions are coming here also.
Yeah.
Sir, you can continue.
Sir, the study you are talking about the untouchability practice, it was recently published in Hindustan Times. It showed that 50% of people, 56% of people in rural areas, they still practice untouchability. Sir, I am audible?
Yes. Please repeat a question, Rashtrapal Singh.
Sir, the article recently, it is not long ago, it is 2 years ago. There was an article on Hindustan Times that 50% of people in urban area and 56% or more in a rural area.
Yeah.
They practice untouchability.
True.
And so the main difference between the Hindu and other religion, I think, is that it is a Varna and Varga system. The other religion, Christian, Muslim, or other other religions, they have Varga system. People can move from work to another work. They have no problem if a poor person becomes rich. But in a Varna system, they are say freeze to one system. So it is very difficult in move from, it is not the lower Varnam, and we can't come out of this.
Yeah. Rashtrapal, I would like to say a few words here, just a few words before our brother takes on. First is, see, this speech is addressed to our people, and Babasaheb Ambedkar is asking us to build our strength. Yes, okay, sir. With sir, what are the three strengths that we need, sir? Muthu sir, 3 strengths we need.
We need a manpower, financial, mental.
Right, and we also need to bring a support from outside. Okay.
Yes.
So yes, sir. So we can bring the support from the black movement, because Babasaheb Ambedkar has given us a language to talk with the blacks. We can get the support from the democratic countries, because Babasaheb Ambedkar has given us the language to talk with the democratic countries. Also, Babasaheb Ambedkar has given us a language to talk with the people in the East, like the Buddhists, China, Japan, Korea, and so on and so forth. So what Babasaheb Ambedkar has done is given us a kind of the bridges to talk to engage with the people all over the places. Number one. Number two is, when this Pune Pact was signed between Babasaheb Ambedkar and whatever this Gandhi thing, Pune Pact, and after that Babasaheb Ambedkar went to Agra. And when he saw that how the people in Agra and North supported him in 40s, he gave a speech, very important speech. He said that had I known that so much of my people are standing behind me, I would have never signed the Pune Pact. Now, if it is today, if the Pune Pact situation comes today, what will happen? The whole country will burn. You understand? So the beauty of our association like IIDF or whatever we do nationally is that we are creating the strength, a national strength. So for example, now see, after Maharashtra, the second important place for Babasaheb Ambedkar was Punjab, United Punjab. So many people supported Babasaheb Ambedkar in United Punjab, the Lahore and whatnot. So this was like a bastion of Ambedkarite movement. The first biography of Babasaheb Ambedkar was published in Karachi, isn't it? And this annihilation of caste speech was to be delivered in Lahore. They were all our people. It was a strong center. And then, of course,
Even they all converted,
there is a cut in your voice, brother. So what I want to get it at is, you know, that now we have enough scope. That's why we have to develop this IIDF, because IIDF and other national networks, because it gives strength to a community which are localized. So for example, something happened tomorrow in Punjab, you know, like this, when this Gurudwara was, you know, there was a firing in Gurudwara in Vienna, the Punjab was burning. But, you know, our people here didn't know what is happening there. So now if the situation is changed, a lot of our people will agitate all over the places. So I think, you know, the point that Muthu sir has made very beautifully about, you know, the speech Baba Ambedkar delivered, and the way he summarized it. I think we have to understand that, you know, we have enough strength now. We just need to connect and collect. Muthu sir.
Yes, I would say, see, if I'm in a hospital, I want to act on my subordinates. I have to use some strategy. I have to keep them away. That is the conspiracy. Okay, that is the Brahminical conspiracy to divide the people. That is what they can rule the country.
Bilkul.
That is what happened. That's a conspiracy theory where they implemented through the kings, through the government, through the whatever so called. Keep the people divided. It's not only divided, among the untouchable, they created so many subcastes so that they can't come together.
True.
If you are not got united, they can enjoy the power.
Good.
That is what I believe.
Good.
And it is almost like it's a mental game. It's not like a conversion is not for the whatever it is. It is like in your mind. If you are a Hindu, you are a untouchable.
Yes.
And the moment if you are come out of Hindu, you are not an untouchable.
Yes, sir.
It's a mind game.
Yes, sir.
I would say, so if in the, even that is what he says. If your mind is not free, even though you are in the prison, you are a slave. Even if your mind is not free, even if you are alive, it's almost equal to death. So freedom of mind, that how you are going to get your freedom of mind. As long as you are in the Hindu fold, your mind is not going to free. If you go and tell anybody, say that, so the next question comes to you, you are a Hindu. Hindu means what? If you say that I am a Buddhist or a Christian or I am a Islam, the next question is not arising from that stops there.
True. You know, before we conclude, I would like to say about freedom of mind. And, you know, Baba Saheb Ambedkar has very beautifully said that whose mind is free. What we call the freedom of mind is somebody who understands the cause and effect. So cause and effect, you know, it seems like, you know, very simple concept. It's a very beautiful concept. See, most of the time we accept anything, any belief without questioning it. And what a scientist does, he or she tries to question why this particular phenomena has come into being. So when Baba Saheb Ambedkar talks about cause and effect, he talks about a mind which always inquires and, you know, which always inquisitive about why this thing has arisen. What is the reason that the caste system comes into being? What is the reason that the annihilation of caste can happen? So, you know, the mind that is dynamic, the mind which thinks in terms of the cause and effect, which in other words means a scientific mind. And if we want to look at it from the Buddhist perspective, it is a mind that understands what is called the Paticca Samutpad, Pratitya Samutpad, dependent co-origination, because according to it, nothing exists of its own. Everything is compounded. Everything comes into being because of the several regions. There is no single region. There are like sets of reason by which certain things arise. So for example, you know, like we talk about the rain, for example. So without temperature, without sun, without water, there cannot be raining. Or for example, human beings, our existence is interdependent on so many things. And, you know, without that, we don't stand alone. You know, our existence doesn't stand alone. Our existence is dependent on so many things, like the oxygen that we breathe, the food that we eat, and so on and so forth. So the point here is a mind is only free when it understands that, you know, the cause and effect, how the things arise, how they pass away. So this is actually a training. Freedom doesn't come. Freedom is not an abstract state or a concept. It is a state of being or the state of mind which is inquiring all the time. It doesn't accept anything blindly. Anything. It examines, it explores, it tries to find the evidence for certain belief. So for example, let's take traditionally people talk about the God as a prime thing. And then the question will be, you know, if the God is creator of everything, for example, then the question is from what God has created everything. And if the answer is that the God has created everything out of nothing, then it's foolish to talk about it. But if there was something existing before God created the world, that means God is not the first creator of the world. Okay, for example, A was created from B. So who created B? Then, you know, who created, if the B was created by C, who created C ad infinitum? So according to, you know, science, it is not wise to talk about the beginning and end of the world, because that concept are, you know, that is the construction of a human mind, beginning and end. Okay, so that is how our minds are conditioned, but we doesn't have to think in terms of the beginning and end. So scientific mind inquires into the things, inquires into social phenomena, political phenomena, understand the causes and the conditions, and you know how those causes and conditions can be changed to uh, eradicate those phenomena. So we can have a longer discussion on this. It's like doctor. Okay, madam.
Yeah. In my opinion, because of a lack of education and graded inequality, untouchables became slave, and they lost the mental power to fight, to struggle. So that is why Dr. Baba Sahib says that whose mind is free then. Then further he says that one who realizes his rights, responsibilities and duties, one who is not slave of circumstances, one who do not keep faith on anything, and he doesn't, unless he sees the cause and effect, one who doesn't live his life under the direction of others, but because he is mentally slave, at present scenario also, he is not free to work, he is not free to fight, he considers himself a slave, because he has no manpower, no finance, and he is living his life under slavery into today's scenario also.
I think we have another meeting at, okay, Rajendra bhai.
Today we have another meeting at 9 o'clock.
Okay.
So before leaving to conclude, we have 2 minutes for each participant. So can they have any query regarding it up to our half session? Babu Raj sir, would you like to ask anything? Babu Raj sir?
Hello, good evening. Yeah. So it was a good presentation by Dr. Muthu. Nothing more to add, but one thing is going away from Hinduism. Okay. Are we running away from it or hiding and taking shelter under some other religion? Can't we stay there and fight it out?
Sir, that question has already been dealt by Baba Sahib Ambedkar, Babu Raj ji.
Yeah.
That if you stay in the religion, Hindu religion, you cannot reform it because the breath of Hinduism is caste.
Okay.
For example, you know, the Muslims can fight against the caste system because caste system is not the part and parcel of Islam and Christianity or Sikhism. It's not the part and parcel of that. But the heart of Hinduism is the caste system. So how can you fight, remain, you know, see, I will give you an example. Baba Sahib Ambedkar didn't talk about the positional change in the Varnashrama Dharma. He talked about the structural change. And how can you have a structural change? Only by coming out of the structure, isn't it? So, you know, it's very important that, you know, if we try to fight within that, Gandhi has promised Baba Sahib Ambedkar in 1932 that in 5 years, all the Hindu perception will change and there will not be untouchability. Okay, so it's very, Baba Sahib Ambedkar, you know, tried hard I will give an example. There was a person from a Chamar community who was well versed in Sanskrit. So Baba Sahib said that because he is such a learned man, why don't you make him a Shankaracharya, and I will not leave Hinduism.
Okay.
Okay, so they didn't accept it. Nobody is going to accept that, isn't it? So, for example, if the untouchables can become the Brahmin priests, we have no problem. No, Baba Sahib Ambedkar was saying in Annihilation of Caste that there should be an examination to become the priest. Why only Brahmin should become the priest?
Yeah.
Isn't it? So, if everybody can become the priest, then the Brahminical privilege goes. So, there was an attempt in Tamil Nadu where there was an exam for the priesthood, right, sir?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Isn't it? So there are various ways we see it. The religion that treats us down cannot be our religion. Forget it. The religion
Or-
that
Yeah.
makes us an untouchable cannot be our religion.
Understood. But my point is, slowly it has penetrated into Christianity and Muslim also. As far as TN is concerned, Tamil Nadu is concerned, you can see casteism in Christianity as well Muslims also.
True.
So basically coming out of Hinduism, and the only available thing is Buddhism. And can anyone guarantee that it won't be there in Buddhism also in near future?
Because what is happening now, see, that's a danger for Buddhism, but because it's now becoming, it's coming from the grassroots. The leaders of the Buddhist movements are the Dalits.
Okay.
Okay, because we will be the leaders of the Buddhist movement.
Okay.
So if we are the leaders of the Buddhist movement, yeah, if we are following the caste system itself, then it's our defeat.
Okay.
Isn't it? So, like for example, Islam, when Islam came to India, there were already Ashrafis and Ajlabs and whatnot. Then, the Christianity, a lot of these Brahmin bishops and whatnot. But in Buddhism, now there is an attempt to make Buddhism into elite religion. There are people in India who like I'll give you an example. You see, this Atal Bihari Vajpayee, when he goes to China, he tells the Chinese people that he is a Buddhist. Same with Narendra Modi.
Yeah.
Okay, once I was traveling from Delhi to Beijing. That time I was working with the government, and there was a person, Chinese person, sitting next to me in the flight. So I asked him, I thought every Chinese is a Buddhist. So I asked him out of curiosity, "Are you a Buddhist?" He said, "Yes, my parents were Buddhist. I have love for Buddhism, but I cannot say that I'm a Buddhist." But he told me that interestingly, Sonika, I will stop here. Okay, please, everybody share.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much to all the members for joining today. And thank you, Muthu sir, for the wonderful presentation we had today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Session is over.
Over to Rajendra sir.
Thank you, Muthu sir. You have made a wonderful presentation, and the whole documents you relate to contemporary conditions. So we are very, I'm congratulating to you, and we are very thankful to you. He's such a wonderful personality we have, because sir is a neurosurgeon, and we know that the work of neurosurgeon is commendable, and they don't have a time for such like activity, but he made it so wonderful, sir. I am very, very thankful to you, and I am very thankful to Alka ma'am, Gurcharan Singh sir, and Baburaj sir, Bharat sir, Prafula sir, Jatinder sir, and Kail sir also to be a part of this today event. We have very short of time because we have another meeting at 10 o'clock, so we are moving to end this session. So thank you to all of us.
Thank you, Jai Bhim.
Thank you. Jai Bhim.
Jai Bhim.
Thank you.
Jai Bhim, Jai Bhim, Jai Bhim.
Yeah.